included in the recording, then you can make a statement of that to the chat. So I think all of that is done. So moving into the content of today, we know that the Sustainable Development Goals have provided a very important global framework for governments to work towards economic, social, and other forms of progress that we really need. And we find ourselves now at a critical juncture because we're about halfway through the period of time designated in this agenda, but we see that social and economic development and the distribution of resources has been starkly uneven. And that's been emphasized very much through the COVID-19 pandemic and the effects of the climate crisis, which are really coming to a new critical juncture there with a lot of different actual natural disaster events becoming state disasters because of the lack of appropriate response, or again, that distribution of resources not reaching the people who need it the most. So what we want to do here is really emphasize that political will, trust in public institutions, and the spirit of collaboration that we need to achieve these goals also can't just come from countries, but it has to come from civil society, and it has to come from people who are doing the service work and also receiving services. So all the grassroots inputs here are very important. And we also see that maybe we need to make a recommitment to the SDGs because there are so many distractions and so many other agendas or guidance and frameworks that we're working towards, but the SDGs offer an extremely valuable lens for moving forward towards better social and economic development, among other developments. So working with UNANIMA International and the non-governmental working group to end homelessness, among other groups that we were a part of during my tenure at UNANIMA, it showed me how much the collaboration and high spirits drive real change in our international system. We saw a great example of this when we had the UN affirm a definition of homelessness for the first time in 2021. And I think many people here on the call today were a part of that process and saw how amazing that was to our spirits and to the notion that we can drive change within the international system. So what I'll say for today is that I really love to see these ideas bolstered of how we can further collaborate, how we can further legitimize the advocacy that's coming from the grassroots up. And as Jean mentioned, the two UNANIMA international publications about the linkages between homelessness and the SDGs, we hope that these were an extremely valuable contribution, not only in the content about homelessness and homelessness facing families, women, children, migrants, refugees, these priority groups, but also that the SDGs can be an important lens for analysis of issues that we are facing and a way to see the interconnectedness of different challenges and crises facing us today. So with that, I'll also make a note that the common definitions of multilateralism describe it as an alliance of multiple countries pursuing a common goal, but we know that civil society and NGOs, non-governmental organizations, nonprofits, faith-based organizations, on all of these have to work together with governments to really make this change happen on the ground. So for that, we are hosting today this event in parallel to the SDG Summit, which aims to have attendees rethink conceptions of multilateralism from a variety of perspectives. So I'm really glad to have all these unique panelists here today to share their talents and insights. We have panelists from permanent missions, UN agencies, and civil society who will contribute their expertise and recommendations related to the people and partnership SDGs, goals 1 through 6 and 17. So I'll introduce the first speaker, who is Fergal Maithan. He presented his credentials to UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres on 26th of August in 2022. He's the permanent representative of Ireland to the United Nations. Prior to this appointment, Fergal spent considerable parts of his career working for the government of Ireland in support of the Northern Ireland peace process and implementation of the Good Friday Agreement, working for the International Fund for Ireland, as well as on justice and security issues and on Northern Ireland political affairs. Most recently, as Director General of the Ireland, UK, and Americas Division of the Department of Foreign Affairs, he led the departmental team working on Northern Ireland peace process issues, Irish-British relations, including the impact of Brexit, and Irish-US and Irish-Canadian bilateral relations, as well as relations with Latin America and the Caribbean region. Fergal was also the Director General of the department's Corporate Services Division with responsibility for human resources, finance, ICT, property management, and corporate governance and compliance issues. A very intersectional background there. And additionally, he has twice served in the permanent representation of Ireland to the European Union in Brussels. Earlier in his career, Fergal was seconded to the European Community Monitoring Mission in the former Yugoslavia. He was the director of the department's Human Rights Unit from 1997 to 1999, and also served as the consular officer in the Embassy of Ireland to Italy, Rome, from 1992 to 1996. So going back to the beginning, he was born in 1968 and studied history and English in Trinity College Dublin and business studies in University College Dublin. He's married to Miss Ciara Delaney, and they have 4 children. So thank you so much for that extensive biography, because it really shows the variety of experiences and identities that you're bringing to the table. So with that, the floor is yours, and thank you.
Thank you very much, Karen. No need to give my date of birth, but look, it's really good to be here. I just want to thank Jean and the organization UNANIMA for the invitation, but also for your support over the past year, particularly in my current role as co-facilitator for the political declaration for the SDG Summit, but also for your ongoing engagement on these issues over many years. There's so much to speak about here, but I don't want to be too long because I know there's very important speakers here. For me, I think the last year has been a journey. You read my CV. What's absent from that CV is work in the development space, is work in climate change, is work in sustainable development. And I bring a very different perspective to all that. But I'm very conscious that in my current role, I'm standing on the shoulders of if not giants, but really important, impactful people like David Donoghue and John Gilroy, who were involved in the negotiations in 2014, 2015, you know, getting agreement on the SDGs, on Agenda 2030, and then driving on. And for the Irish delegation and for the Irish government, it's really important and it's really significant, but we wanted to circle back and be involved in this process again in 2023 to, in a sense, you know, course correct where we're going wrong, to be involved in re-energizing the goals, re-energizing implementation, and in a sense trying to help recapture that spirit of 2014, 2015, and to play our part in whatever way we can in really ensuring implementation of the goals to the very best possible place. We may not get there in terms of all the goals, in terms of all the indicators by 2030, but what's really important is that we don't give up now, that we don't walk away from that challenge, that we don't say, actually, that's not the correct framework, that's not the correct diagnosis for the ills of the world. It actually is the correct diagnosis, that it's the correct framework, it's the correct set of goals, and our challenge now is to implement to the greatest extent possible over the next 7 years. And that's what we've been trying to capture in the work of negotiations around the political declaration for the summit starting next Monday. And I'll come back to that in a moment. Just in relation to the role of civil society, we can't emphasize enough the importance of that role. We simply would not have got the goals in 2014, 2015 without the active engagement of civil society. I sense, talking to colleagues, including John Gilroy, who's in the room, that it was a much more fluid and open engagement, and that a lot of work was done to kind of break down the geographic blocks and regional blocks that kind of can stymie work in the UN. And so the voice of civil society and the NGO community were much more present in the room than perhaps on previous UN perspectives and occasions, and maybe since then that's been rolled back somewhat. So really important that, you know, the role of civil society in keeping the focus on all aspects of the SDGs and implementation, and a really important role ahead in the years ahead. I think in Ireland, our experience, and Jean will know this, and I see there's some other speakers coming in and participants from Ireland, I think we realized some time ago that government wasn't the only answer. Government, whether national or local or regional, can't do the heavy lifting into addressing all the needs of society. And the role of civil society is just hugely important. And we take, for example, a number of huge social issues where Ireland was very much divided, and we developed models around national dialogue, national conversation, citizens' assemblies, just to kind of broaden out the debate, to involve all citizens in those debates as to how we address issues, be them economic, social, in terms of how we run society. And we did the same. We followed the same model in developing our voluntary national reviews, in developing our implementation plan for the SDGs, a very strong civil society component to a national dialogue, a national stakeholder process, which is very, very important. That's not to say we've got everything right in Ireland on SDG implementation, far from it. There was a really, really good report issued earlier this year, which was prepared by the 2030 Coalition in Ireland, I suppose identifying the gap between political support, political rhetoric, and an actual implementation on the ground. And that's hard. I think when we talk about implementation, it can be really hard to get government working together across all sectors, across all ministries, to really implement. And if that's difficult in Ireland, which is a relatively small, relatively wealthy, relatively cohesive society with relatively stable politics, how much more difficult can that be in countries where those issues aren't present? And I think what we saw in this latest process was a real cry for help from many, many countries. I think there's over 50 facing real debt crisis issues, really facing real difficulty in accessing financial markets. And so if you look at our political declaration, or the draft political declaration, which is to be endorsed this coming week, like a lot of the paragraphs are focusing on the means of implementation, are focusing on IFI reform, are focusing on SDG stimulus, are focusing on the debt crisis, are focusing on reform of the multilateral development banks. And that's very, very important, because that's where there's a real cry for help at the moment from many, many countries across the globe. Really, really challenging. And it's implementation of the SDGs is not all about finances. It's not all about funding. It's not about access to markets. But it's very hard to invest in education, to invest in health, to invest in all those really important SDGs if there's a debt crisis. And that's why I suppose what we wanted to do in this process was really to respond to those concerns. And there are concerns that, for example, the UN Secretary General has voiced in a very articulate way about the need to reform the international financial architecture to really address the funding issue for many countries. Where we are now, this process itself, I suppose we began working with the Qatari ambassador, Ambassador Al-Thani, and our team. We picked up the baton in January and have really spent the last 8 months, yes, negotiating with member states, yes, negotiating with those regional blocs that we spoke about, but also really actively engaging with civil society. And I don't think there's a request that we didn't accept to speak to civil society, to speak at events in person or online. Not just to speak, but also to listen, to hear what civil society was saying. And for me, coming from a non-development background, for me, that's been hugely informative, and it's helped inform our work as we've gone through the process. I think the space for civil society in the UN has narrowed compared to 2014, 2015, and maybe you'll have your own views on that. It can be hard to keep the space open for civil society in UN negotiation processes. We did the very best we could in terms of formal consultations in the UN itself, but not without some resistance and pushback from certain quarters. It wasn't universally welcome, but we tried to keep open that space to the very greatest extent possible, and in formal terms, and then informally we've done an awful lot of outreach, and we've tried to be as responsive as we can to hear the voice of civil society from across the globe, and the perspective that you bring to bear, and we try to reflect that in our drafting. I'm sure it falls short of what you would have liked to see in some areas. That's the reality of the negotiating process. I think I don't think anybody is entirely satisfied, entirely happy with the product, with the declaration. But it is, it's a sloppy, messy UN process involving 193 member states, and it is imperfect. But we feel, in all its imperfections, it does speak to the moment in terms of both the need to renew our vows to the SDGs, and I think you put it in those terms, Kieran, at the start. Bringing governments together at head of state, head of government level next Monday, next Tuesday, to recommit in a political sense to the Sustainable Development Goals and their implementation. That's the first point. The second point, and the second section, I suppose, sets out where we are now. So it's realistic. It's showing where we've fallen short, and we have the science, we have the data, the empirical evidence from a number of UN reports, the scientific report earlier this year, and then the Secretary General's special report, I think, that came out in April. So identifying where we're falling short, and identifying ways that we can really measure where it's fallen short, and measuring who's been left behind. We have this great ambition to leave no one behind and to assist those furthest behind first. But we need to have the data about who they are, where they are, what are the challenges, and I think that's important too. And then the final section, which is where the real meat is, the action verbs, the commitments. There's a lot of focus on means of implementation, but not solely, and that's very important. It's a concise document in UN terms, 10 pages as opposed to 40 or 50. We felt that was very important. We feel it speaks to the moment, and what we want is for governments to bring that back home, not just put it on a shelf, but to bring it back home and use it to really drive their actions over the next 7 years. In terms of multilateralism, and it's a fair point. I mean, the world looks different now than it did in 2015. We all know the reasons why. It's a sharper place. We see the impact now in a very real way of the climate emergency. The world is burning. We can see it before our very eyes. We've been through a global pandemic, and we saw there where actually we weren't all in it together. Access to technology, access to vaccines wasn't addressed in a fair and equitable way. We've seen conflicts, not just Russia's invasion of Ukraine, but elsewhere. We see governments collapsing and coups in the Sahel. The weak institutions and what that means. We see, only today the UN, reported that the impact of the floods in Libya are far worse because of conflict and because of bad governance and lack of institutions, lack of good, strong, accountable institutions. So these are all very real challenges. And then also the global food insecurity, driven, yes, by the conflict in Ukraine and the war on Ukraine, but also, cost of living crisis, inflation, and access to markets. So it's a really toxic mix that we have to address. But what we didn't want to do was bring heads of state and government together just to wring hands and say the world is in a state of chassis, as one of our poets used to say, the world is in a state of crisis and chaos. We know that. The question is, what can we do about it? And you have to have a vision that world leaders can coalesce around to drive forward and say, yes, we're in a bad way. Yes, the goals are slipping badly in terms of implementation, but we're not giving up. And I think the UN framing of this next week around halftime, the game isn't over at halftime. You drive on in the second half and you try and do better. That's the message. So it's one of realism, urgency, and action coming out of next Monday, Tuesday. That's really, really important. So there's some brief comments, all very random, but just to say, one, role of CSOs, hugely important. They were important for the creation of the SDGs, for the agreement around the SDGs, and hugely important to keep governments on track, to keep us in a good place, and to really drive on and not give up on the goals anytime soon. Secondly, the challenges we face in multilateralism. But I was asked, and I'll finish on this point. I was asked by a journalist last week, did this process show that actually multilateralism doesn't work and there was disagreements and all the rest of it? And I had to, in my instinctive response was actually, no, it didn't. What it showed was that actually when push comes to shove, when we're in a severe crisis, the multilateral system can work. we can reach agreement. I saw member states and I saw permanent representatives really stretching themselves to listen to the other sides, to try and understand what other actors were coming from, and really trying to close the gap and reach agreement on a text. And that meant those delegations, those ambassadors, going back to their capitals, really pushing their capitals hard to try and explain, look, we're in a really difficult position. We know we have these strong red lines on finances or on human rights or on whatever, or on various aspects of language in the UN texts. But we all have to stretch ourselves to find the common ground where we can proceed and where we can go forward. And our real hope is next week, the world leaders will come together, will find that common ground, will endorse that common ground, and will drive on. So I draw some hope from this process. What I saw was not rigidity. I saw delegations really working to understand and to find that common ground. And I think that gives us some hope for the future. Yes, it doesn't go far enough. Yes, it doesn't go fast enough. Yes, it's very difficult. But the UN was born in very difficult circumstances, and we found our way through. And I hope we'll find our way through again. But we'll only do it if organizations like yourself and civil society keep us honest as well and drive us forward and challenge us to be the very best we can be. Thanks very much, Kieran.
Thank you so much, Ambassador, for your contributions today. I think on behalf of everyone working in civil society, we really appreciate your engagement with civil society and the give and take that is there, that you also are listening to us and hearing our perspectives. And your attentiveness to keeping civil society space open is critical. We really need that from governments as well as from our side. So thank you for that. I'd also say I really appreciate the analogy of the SDGs being like a diagnosis. Since we have that correct diagnosis, we can go forward and not look back. So thank you for that. So in turning to our next speaker, we have Dr. Despina Aphrodite-Milaki, who is a wonderful contributor to civil society at the UN, who I've had the pleasure of working with for a couple of years. She is the NGO representative at the UN for the International Presentation Association, or IPA, a non-governmental organization with a presence in 20 countries, focusing on the rights of women and children, care of the earth and indigenous and tribal peoples, and embracing the Sustainable Development Goals. She earned her PhD in Germany in international politics. For over 10 years, she provided policy advice to senior government officials in Greece on international relations topics. She was also an external consultant at a law firm in Uganda, monitoring and keeping ahead of UN advocacy opportunities. Dr. Milaki is the co-founder of the Praxis Bonum, a global database on good practices, which provides an easily searchable repository of projects, policies, and activities that have been effectively implemented in various areas at the local, national, and international levels. As the current chair of the 2024 Civil Society Forum, she works with UN departments, agencies, and UN member states, along with civil society stakeholders, to bring the voices of civil society to the UN Commission for Social Development. The forum sets the tone for a productive, enriching, and collaborative dialogue between civil society actors, governments, and UN system organizations. So I will now give the floor to Dr. Despina for the first presentation, and then we'll later return back to her for some grassroots voices.
Thank you, Kieran. And I would also wish to thank UNANIMA International, and especially Jean Quinn, the executive director, as well as all co-sponsors for the opportunity to participate in this important event. Allow me to share my screen and my PowerPoint presentation as well. So I hope you all are able to see that. Where is that? Give me a moment. I can't see my screen right now. Okay, so I see my screen. I'm really grateful for being here and contributing to this discussion in the midway point of the historic 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. Our world has changed drastically since the first SDG summit in 2019, and since we adopted the 2030 agenda in 2015, as Ambassador very well stressed earlier. Early efforts after the SDGs were adopted indeed produced some favorable trends. To name a few, extreme poverty and child mortality rates were falling. Some targets for gender equality were seeing positive results. And globally, unemployment was back to levels not seen since before the 2008 financial crisis. However, today, at the midpoint of the implementation of the SDG agenda, the world is falling short of meeting most of the goals by 2030. Progress on more than 50% of targets of the SDGs is weak and insufficient. More than 30% has stalled or gone into reverse. This includes key targets on poverty, hunger, and climate. Multidimensional global challenges persist and threaten any progress achieved so far by people, communities, and governments around the world. Data is staggering. People and entire communities in developing and developed nations are made and kept poor in a variety of contexts. They lack access not only to basic income and employment, but also to other human rights, including low-cost nutritional food, water and sanitation, affordable housing, quality healthcare, quality education, and lifelong skills learning, healthy environment free from hazards and risks, all essential foundations of the well-being and dignity that are captured in the 2030 agenda. Violence against women and girls is at epidemic levels. The effects of climate change, global migration, the threat of nuclear war, the global cost of living crisis are all hindering social development. The COVID-19 pandemic, with its severe economic and social impacts, only amplified this pre-existing reality and the multiple layers of injustice. A fundamental shift is needed to put the world on a better path. A needs-based approach is required to achieve people-centered decisions. People's needs are changing in response to a quickly evolving context. Key participatory inclusive processes need to be established in order to listen to the needs of people with direct experience, of any kind experience, of homelessness, extreme poverty, unemployment, gender equality, of discrimination. The involvement of these people in decision-making is essential in securing a sustainable future for all. They can help us accelerate progress in sustainable development and realize the future we all want, the future we need for all. Civil society has successfully demonstrated that needs-based programs are more empowering and more effective. NGOs, with their diverse experience, expertise, and capacity at the local level, play a key role in the march towards the attainment of SDGs. In the context of accelerating progress and localizing the SDGs, my organization, the International Presentation Association, the Presentation Sisters, and the IPA people work across the globe through respective ministries to further these goals and create a more just world for all. Allow me to share a few snapshots with photos from certain IPA projects at the grassroots level. For instance, we run SDG awareness programs, and we provide basic medical services to people in need. We provide housing and shelter to women and children refugees. We empower students on SDGs and how to address global injustice. We provide any kind of support, from counseling, financial and emotional support, to basic supplies to women victims of domestic violence. We organize awareness-raising workshops on women's rights, gender equality, and human trafficking. We empower women by establishing skills training workshops. Students in our schools, in schools founded by IPA sisters, learn to collaborate with indigenous children and to donate goods for people in need. We engage people in environmental initiatives and educate local communities to adopt an environmental sustainable way of living. We advocate for women's rights and provide legal aid to vulnerable population and victims of gender-based violence, since the elimination of gender-based violence is our UN-specific advocacy focus. In this context, we also established collaboration with local national institutions on how to improve judicial systems. In the context of promoting SDG 5, we have conducted 2 research projects, providing a voice to women who have experienced gender stereotypes and domestic violence, and focusing further on relevant policy responses by the governments and NGOs. How can such or similar successful initiatives like those I just mentioned be scaled? Civil society actors should be considered equal partners who seek a common objective and therefore pool their resources and competencies to achieve it. Governments and other stakeholders need to acknowledge civil society's role, among others in service delivery, accountability and watchdog, monitoring, and stronger partnerships between civil society, government, and other key actors should be formed that encourage greater involvement in decision-making processes. Now, what is the role of member states in better implementing the SDGs at the local and national levels within the next 7 years until the deadline? Governments should advance targeted policies and actions to eradicate poverty, reduce inequality, and address climate change, with a focus on advancing the rights of women and girls and empowering the most vulnerable. By expanding, for example, social protection floors and access to essential services, creating job opportunities in the care and green economies, urgently tackling the profound crisis in education, strengthening action to advance gender equality, and so many others. Governments must also promote social inclusion in order to secure dignity, opportunity, and rights for all. Governments should strengthen national and local capacity, accountability, and public institutions to deliver accelerated progress on SDGs. The attainment of SDGs must become a central focus for national planning, oversight mechanisms, and domestic budgets.
Excuse me, Despina, you have 1 more minute.
Thank you, Kieran. I'm just wrapping up. At the SDG Summit next week, member states, besides the adoption of the forward-looking political declaration, must present global and national commitments for an SDG-related transformation. The SDG Summit will be a critical moment for member states to galvanize efforts to renew their commitment to the SDGs. It will also be an opportunity for all of us in civil society to advocate for urgency, ambition, and action to realize the goals. When global leaders met to adopt the SDGs in 2015, they declared that the future of humanity and of our planet lies in our hands. At this midpoint, these words are truer than ever. It is now up to all of us, all the stakeholders, to ensure that the SDGs are achieved in full and on time. We are bound to one another by our common vulnerability and our shared humanity. One of the great lessons of our species history is that we can accomplish a lot with very little if we work together towards our shared goals. As Ambassador stressed earlier, we must not give up now. We must act now if we want to secure a sustainable future for all. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Mawaki. That was so profound. I'd really like to emphasize the words that we are bound by common vulnerability and shared humanity. That's very powerful. I think the parallels that you drew between governments and civil societies, multilateral goals, and necessitated actions are very poignant. So thank you so much for that. I believe I'm turning the floor to you once again to share some voices from the grassroots.
Yes. So I'm also here today serving as a member of the NGO Committee for Social Development, especially the Grassroots Subcommittee. We have prepared some videos. As a civil society, we are preparing for many summits and policy deliberations during this month, next week, the SDG Summit, next year, the Summit of the Future, and hopefully the World Social Summit in 2025. So the Grassroots Subcommittee of the NGO Committee on Social Development has invited people from around the world to share their experiences and bring their voices to the international community and to the United United Nations. We have invited them to submit short videos or share their thoughts in writing. We specifically asked them if they could deliver a message to this SDG summit, what this message would be. They were also asked to share in a few sentences what they most want governments and UN officials to hear. And this might include their hopes for 2030 and what is most needed in their area to improve the quality of life. So today, I'm happy to share with you 2 of these videos. The first one has been submitted from the International Presentation Association, my organization, and our people in Zambia. And the second one from Make Mothers Matter and their network organization called Child Nepal. We have received inputs from all around the world and in multiple languages, but we chose these ones as indicative examples of what we have gathered so far, which indicate the challenges and urgent needs for action in these 2 countries. Just give me one moment to start sharing the videos. Okay.
My name is Stali. I live in a remote village of Western Province of Zambia. Since 2015, the condition of people has improved a bit, but not to the expectations of the Sustainable Development Goals. For example, there was supposed to be a school and a health facility within a radius of 5 kilometers, but that is not the case in the community I live in. The most needed facilities in my community are health facilities, educational facilities, safe and clean drinking water, eradication of poverty through job creation and women empowerment, food security by smart agriculture that is resilience to climate change, gender equality through community sensitizations. The current programs that are happening in trying to achieve these set goals is construction of schools and health facilities, but this is more prominent in towns than in communities. My hope for 2030 is to see all children go to schools that are easily accessed at a radius of 5 kilometers. Rural community members can reach health facilities without facing a challenge of distance, availability of clean and safe drinking water, decent habitation for rural community members, especially women and girls, creation of employment for youth and women empowerment in trying to fight against poverty and hunger. Government to make strict policies in cutting down of trees, planting trees to cope with climate change. A community free from gender-based violence is my dream, and all people to live in peace and harmony with gender equality and equity. Thank you. My name is Stali.
Allow me to share the second video as well. Here you are.
Namaste and warm greetings. I am Mohan Dangal, Executive Director of Child Nepal. Child Nepal works for the protection and promotion of children's rights in Nepal. I thank you very much for this opportunity to share our hopes for 2030. Today we gather here to share our hopes for 2030 and envision a brighter future for Nepal. As we embark on this journey, let us reflect the Sustainable Development Goals 2030 and what we can do to improve the quality of life of all citizens in our beautiful country. Our first hope is for Nepal, where every citizen have the access to quality education and lifelong learning opportunities. Education unlocks the doors to progress and prosperity, empowering our future generations to become leaders and innovators. Our second hope is to build a robust healthcare system that ensures affordable and equitable access to healthcare services to all. Our next hope is to embrace renewable energy sources, protecting our environment and mitigating the impacts on climate change through intergenerational learning and action. Our fourth hope is to achieve gender equality, empowering women and girls to actively participate in all aspects of our society. Our next hope is to celebrate our diversity and promote social harmony, thereby fostering a united and inclusive society. Our final hope is to strengthen our spirit of volunteerism, as we believe that together we can overcome any sorts of challenges. These are our hopes for 2030, and we believe that with dedicated efforts, collaboration and determination, we can make them a reality. Together we can build a better world. Thank you for your time and commitment. Let's rise together as one towards a prosperous and sustainable Nepal. Thank you everybody. Namaste.
So we are currently in the phase of analyzing the material and trying to identify the issues pointed out by the participants. So far, some of the issues that came up are poverty, gender equality, education, climate change, health, access to water, and so many others. We plan to host an event in the future to share with everybody the findings of our survey. It's exactly what we did in the past with other surveys, and when we launched the respective reports as a grassroots subcommittee of the NGO Committee for Social Development. So be on the lookout for that event. It will be very interesting and exciting, and we look forward to seeing you all there. Thank you, Kirin. Back to you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Malaki, and I look forward to coming to that event in the future. I think it's so wonderful to hear about these grassroots reports in a manner of them sharing their hopes and dreams, something that we have in common, our hopes and dreams from civil society and governments, and everything identified in the SDGs are along the same lines of what we're hearing is needed on the grassroots. So keeping with this empowerment of ourselves to keep the mobilization going. Thanks so much for that, Despina. And to the whole grassroots subcommittee and the CSECD committee as well. So next, we're going to have a longtime collaborator of UNANIMA International, who is Winifred Doherty, a member of the Congregation of Our Lady of Charity of the Good Shepherd, an NGO in special consultative status with the United Nations. Winifred is from Ireland and is the main NGO representative for the Sisters and Partners in Mission since 2008. She is a social worker by profession, graduating from University College Cork, Ireland. She worked in Ethiopia in community development for 16 years, empowering the girl child and young woman through education and microfinance programs. As NGO representative at the United Nations, she collaborates across 70 countries where her organization is engaged, with NGOs in New York and on the global scene regarding policy issues related to poverty eradication, human rights, ending prostitution, human trafficking, and all gender-based violence. She is a passionate promoter of the rights of the girl child, advocate for the implementation of universal social protection, and the realization of the Sustainable Development Goals. So with that, we welcome you to take the floor, Winifred, and thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you very much, Kerwin, and thank you to Jean for this invitation and UNANIMA International. And I suppose the best of multilateralism is present here. I really pay tribute to Ambassador Maitan and Ambassador Al-Thani for modeling for us multilateral principles within the negotiations of the political declaration. I think this is hugely impressive and impactful. And to Despina, I think she has modeled equally the push of civil society and of our multiple organizations represented here in this desire for an inclusive world, a better world, a world where everybody is recognized and respected. So rethinking multilateralism from a variety of perspectives. Well, my perspective is a Catholic sister and the NGO representative for Good Shepherds at the United Nations. And as I look at it, the core elements underpinning the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development are enumerated in the 5 Ps: people, planet, prosperity, peace, and partnership. And these 5 Ps are central to the SDGs and are undergirded by the concept of multilateralism, the concept we are considering today. And some words that try to capture the meaning of multilateralism, like cooperation, consultation, inclusion, and solidarity. So multilateralism, I think, happens when collectively developed rules of engagement and the resolution of potential conflicts are agreed upon and acted upon. And so the United Nations system as a multilateral system has been effective. Trust, relationships, and respect are at its heart. And indeed, the Secretary General said to the Security Council on the 24th of April this year, multilateral cooperation is the beating heart of the United Nations. And I think we heard that in our ambassador, representing one of those nations in these very important negotiations. He went on, it's raison d'etre and guiding vision. And Maria Fernanda Espinosa, who is also well known to all of us, said the SDGs are a true jewel of multilateralism. So in my mind, there's no doubt, but we have to continue the journey of implementing these. So what's preventing us from achieving the SDGs? Our common, comprehensive blueprint for people, planet, and prosperity, resulting from the multilateralist system at its best. And yes, it was a different world in 2015, and I was there when all of these negotiations were taking place. We've seen the voluntary national reviews consistently presented over 7 years in the spirit of multilateralism. And yet, the SDGs are terribly off track. And Desponina has already referenced that. Sorry, I'm messing up your name, Desponina. I offer 2 explanations. First, the current UN system has not managed to keep abreast of global current developments. And secondly, and more importantly for me, the new multilateralism of corporate partnership engagement is erosive in the system and is not the enabler it proposed to be. Why do I say this? I say it because some of the players are not inclusive of the foundational principles, such as the well-being of people and planet, of human rights and gender equality, of resource sharing. Rather, they are a counterforce, an opposing force, raging and plundering, wielding exploitative power over people and governments, while breaching international law and planetary boundaries with impunity. The word of the moment describing this is polycrisis. It seems to be this new word that's up to describe. Climate emergency, new conflicts, increasing number of conflicts, inflation, democratic dysfunction, and the rise of authoritarianism are all contributing to the mass movements of peoples. So the behaviors of some are driving conflicts, poverty, and environmental degradation. The Heinrich von Stiftung European Union and Washington office have a report which I looked at briefly, Shaping the Future of Multilateralism, Inclusive Pathways to a Just and Crisis-Resilient World Order. The authors, just like the SDG report at the moment, paint a troubling picture from trade to climate finance to digital governance, and the human rights, equality, and equity breakdown that runs through these global issues. They argue that the world's richest nations have sidelined their poorer counterparts and profited from their resources with little return. And at the same time, poorer countries have often been caught in the vice of geopolitical and geo-economic competition. And add to that today, the giant development in information technology and artificial intelligence, largely ungoverned, and I would say ungovernable. And these have appeared in the mix. And the digital revolution has become a tool facilitating all sorts of exploitation, false information, and the promotion of neoliberalism.
Sorry to interrupt, Winifred, you have to wrap it up, please.
Okay, I'm almost there.
No problem.
So facilitating this digital revolution has become a facilitating tool, supporting and exploiting and promoting false, disseminating false information and the promotion of neoliberalism. And neoliberalism does not align well with multilateralism. And so some of the efforts in the political declaration to get into this area of how to manage the global finances is hugely important. And I affirm that and recognize it. One of the greatest resources of the United Nations that is at its doorstep is indeed civil society, with their multi-pronged services on the ground, with those left behind. And you've seen images of that from Despina already. And its multiple voices advocating for people, planet, peace, prosperity, and in partnership with all, for all. Citizens all over are engaging with these counter forces towards the world we want. And some have given their lives for this. And we as civil society are on the side of the SDGs. We are a significant piece of the puzzle with the United Nations, seeking to uphold people, planet, peace, prosperity, and partnership in the emergence of the new world order that honors each person in relationship with others, human and non-human, sharing a common home. Trust is the bedrock. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Wow, thank you so much, Winifred, for that really amazing political analysis. I think you'll see comments in the chat supporting you, saying we wish we could speak for longer. We wish we could hear you talk about this identification of neoliberalism as one of the huge impediments to multilateralism functioning. But I also think that we can all draw hope and inspiration from your comment that we are a significant piece of this puzzle and we need to keep pushing on with our advocacy and our work. So thank you so much for that. I'm sure many people would love to see a written copy of that speech. Same goes for the other speakers thus far as well. So with that, we will turn towards our fourth speaker. Thank you so much for being here today, Marissa. Marissa Plewin is a lead analyst for the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, or OECD, and for their work on affordable housing, and manages the OECD Affordable Housing Database in the Directorate for Employment, Labor, and Social Affairs. In over 10 years at the OECD, she has worked with national, regional, and city governments around housing and urban policies. Prior to her current role, she contributed to the OECD's work on inclusive growth in the Office of the Secretary General. Before joining the organization, she advised local and national governments in France and in the United States on housing affordability, sustainability, and urban policy. She completed her graduate work at the University of California, Berkeley, and the École des Hautes Études and Sciences Sociales in Paris. Sorry for my French. Recent work on housing includes policy briefs on homelessness, social housing, affordable housing policies, and housing for people with disabilities. Notes on homelessness data, preventing evictions, housing challenges facing young people, and Finland's successful homelessness approach. A report on housing and inclusive growth, and analyses of affordable housing policies in Latvia, Lithuania, and affordable housing investment in Latvia. So thank you so much for being here today, and we're looking forward to hearing from you, Marissa.
Thank you so much. And thanks for the invitation. I'm really honored to be with you all, and I'm very sorry to have to follow that intervention we just had, because I don't know that I'll be quite as inspirational, because a lot of the data I have is not good news. Just maybe to start with that, the organizers of this event were very kind in allowing me to, as you maybe sense from the biography, I have a bit of a thematic focus here, but they're very kind in allowing me to kind of think through and reflect on the questions that and the issues of this event, really on the focus of homelessness, which is one of the core areas where I work at the OECD. Just quickly, if you're not familiar with the OECD, we are an intergovernmental organization. Our geographic coverage is quite a bit smaller than the UN, and so when I talk to you today about some of the work that we're doing, it obviously will focus on the 38 member countries that we work with. And hopefully some of the issues will obviously be relevant. But I know I saw Lydia was on the call from the Institute of Global Homelessness. And so we have excellent partners and colleagues who are working on a global perspective as well with UNAHabitat. So very happy to be here. Maybe just to start with, I think, a lot of what we've already been hearing today really come to fore when we look at the issue of homelessness, and the work that we're doing. I'm trying, thinking about the SDGs. It comes in very explicit ways, I think, in some of the SDGs, and maybe in less explicit ways, but nonetheless very important in some of the others. So first, I think in terms of what we're doing, we're looking both at the measurement side. I mean, we've talked about the SDGs being very important in terms of the diagnosis, and that's something I think if you've ever studied data on homelessness, if you've ever looked at kind of some of these issues, either within a country or trying to compare across countries, this is the first very challenging obstacle that you face. And one of the issues we're looking at is really how can we improve the measurement. Just to give an example, very few countries went from across one to another define homelessness in the same way. Very few measure it in the same way. There's lots of ways to go about it. And so it makes the numbers that we come up with pretty problematic and hard to understand. And so one of the things we're doing is trying to help close some of those gaps. To give you maybe just one example, we've talked a lot already in this particular, in this event today about gender-based violence, about specifically challenges for women and children. We know from research that for women who experience homelessness, that violence against women is one of the key pathways into homelessness. We know that, and yet in more than half of the countries that we're working with, the official data on homelessness doesn't include shelters for women experiencing domestic violence as part of the data they're collecting about homelessness. So even though we know that that's a big driver, we know that we're not even counting a lot of the places where women experiencing domestic violence are bound to be found and thus counted. And obviously it's not just about counting people. There's a purpose for counting. There's a purpose for trying to get the data and get better data, which is so then we can better address it and better manage it. I think another issue that we're really focused on as well in this space is on the policy responses that governments have put into play. And here I think that the most problematic term in this sense is responses, is that there's really in this space, and I would say it probably goes for a lot of other areas that I've worked on in terms of policies, is that it's very reactive in most senses. It's kind of trying to help people once they've already hit rock bottom or worse, once they've already found themselves in very challenging situations. And so one of the things we're trying to push for and to work with governments for is really to shift towards more of a prevention focus. So how do you identify people who might be at risk? People, like, there's sort of the more obvious cases perhaps, but then there's less obvious ones. And how can you do that? And then once you've identified people, how can you help them? What are some effective solutions? So for instance, we know from working, experience from different countries, from the research, one of the key pathways into homelessness for some people and in some countries is evictions, being evicted from your house. And so looking at what can be some effective ways to prevent evictions. In some cases, it's proven to be effective. People just need one-time financial support. They just need a little bit of help to kind of get over a rough patch, so that can be useful. In other cases, it's more about more mediation that can be provided by local governments, by NGOs, between landlords and tenants. There's lots of different things you can do. Another, I think, important one we're looking at is people who are leaving institutions. So whether this might be the criminal justice system, whether this might be mental health facilities, whether it's youth leaving state care. These are really common across countries, really common ways to become homeless. And so looking at how you can really think about that and anticipate those departures in a more productive way. Maybe I realize I'm getting close to my time already, which is upsetting. But I think on the bright side, I'll try to start with that. Where are we? I think one of the things, and I hope Lydia will agree with me, but we'll see, is I think there has been a lot of movement in recent years in a lot of countries finally taking more leadership in the space of homelessness and putting this on the policy agenda. There's been a lot of push from that, from civil society, from populations. That's a big positive. And this has become, more prominent also in terms of even in driving outcomes in local and national elections. And so it's become, politicians have to pay attention. And in more and more cases, I think they are. There's also a stronger push for improving the measurement of this. And we see that in a lot of countries. But we still have a long ways to go. As we know, at last count, at least in the OECD, close to 2 million people were considered homeless. And we know that's a vast undercount. Only 60% of the countries we've worked with have a national strategy for homelessness, and only 17 countries are really putting forward a strong housing first approach. So really this direction that we're hoping we can move in. Maybe a final word. I was asked to reflect on kind of the role of civil society, of NGOs. There was a very long time in most places where homelessness was not on any government agenda, and where it was really just NGOs and civil society holding up this space. And I think that's something that is largely recognized, I think, in the work that we're doing with governments. And we wouldn't be anywhere close to where we are in terms of the evidence, in terms of just the support systems that are available to people experiencing or at risk of homelessness without NGOs. I mean, they're housing and service providers. They're the advocates, strong advocates in this space. And certainly looking ahead and just continuing to fulfill the role that they've always had, which is holding governments accountable and making sure this agenda isn't neglected. And I think that's where I'll stop for today. But I have it's been a real pleasure to join you today and to share some of this with you.
Thank you so much, Marissa. You ended right on time, and we're happy that we'll hear more from you in the question and answers portion in a little bit. I loved hearing the reminder of how far we've come, as well as those kind of prompts for where we need to be. Seeing that only 17 countries have strong housing first approaches, there is already an identified area where countries can clearly make progress towards the SDGs by adopting that. So thank you so much for that identification. And I think this was a point of advocacy for the UN, was that a lot of this homelessness data does not include transitional housing. So having a better and more comprehensive data can also help us to move forward more clearly. So thank you so much again. We have our last speaker of the day coming up. Liliane Hunzimana is a representative to the UN for the Baha'i International Community's New York office. Her areas of work include social development, youth, intergenerational cooperation, and peace and security. Liliane has a background researching and writing on issues related to diversity and inclusion. She also currently serves as secretary of the NGO CSOC-D committee and co-chairs of the Communication Task Force of the Global Coalition on Youth, Peace and Security. Lily holds a master's in public and international affairs and a bachelor of social science specializing in African studies and political science. So coming from a very interesting background of academia and civil society, thank you so much for being here today, and you have the floor.
Thank you so much, Kieran, for the introduction. I must say it's quite a lot to come after all these wonderful speakers to be able to speak to some issues related to just kind of this particular moment that we're in with the Agenda 2030. But I really appreciate the kind invitation from UNANIMA to join this wonderful panel of speakers. So I'd like to first start by acknowledging and thanking His Excellency Ambassador Maithan for joining us, and also all the wonderful colleagues who've presented their research and their reflections so far. Just to begin, I also want to touch on some of the things that have been mentioned before around the Agenda 2030 and really the significance of this moment when it was agreed upon in 2015. In many ways, this was unprecedented in human history, where we had over 8 million people from 193 countries participating in a global conversation to define the new development agenda. And this was really an amazing accomplishment by the UN and its stakeholders and the various civil society organizations that participated in that process. I think it's also important to appreciate an important global capacity that was gained at that moment, where the body of humanity today is able to envision and articulate to a degree unsurpassed in previous ages the world it collectively wants, which is reflected in the 17 goals of Agenda 2030. So I think through this process, we've learned that we need to be able to strengthen the processes of learning at all levels, from the local to the global, which can be a critical driver for continued progress moving forward. But as we can see today, really the current geopolitical situation has changed, and we recognize that those with limited material means far outnumber those living in abundance. And really, I will ask
Vamos apanhá-lo daquele lado porque apanhamos.
Sorry, we'll ask that everyone mute their microphone. Please continue.
Yes, I was just reflecting on our current status today, that really we live in a world where we have large numbers of individuals with material means that far outnumbers those living, with limited material means far outnumber those living in material abundance. And it can no longer be realistically imagined that a small segment of humanity should, drawing on its own resources and according to its own views, bring about advancement for the rest. Really, and it's unfortunate that the aggregate talents of several billion individuals represents a phenomenal reservoir of resources for constructive change that we have not been able to tap across a number of geographic regions. So I think we are in a moment where we must acknowledge that global development will never be sustainably achieved through just monetary means alone. I think in many ways we're acknowledging that the societies we yearn to create do not just depend on the acquisition of material resources, because if this were the case, in many cases where we have the world's wealthiest nations, these would be paragons of equality, justice, sustainability, and social cohesion. So I think there's something else that is missing in this equation. So the word diagnosis has been used many times during this panel. I think we need to be able to diagnose the underlying causes of seemingly intractable challenges. So for example, we often talk about how eradicating poverty in all its forms is the greatest global challenge. And in many ways, this stems from even more fundamental issue, namely that those we see personal and collective values that allow poverty to exist in a world with sufficient resources for everybody. In this light, poverty reflects not simply a scarcity of material resources, but actually a deficiency in the way human beings perceive, relate, and value one another. So one of the questions presented in the concept note really ask us, what are the transformations that are necessary to improve the implementation of the Sustainable Development Goals? And as was accurately described in the concept note, development and the distribution of resources is starkly uneven. So this made me wonder, what does it look like to think about transformation in the context of one particular SDG? As was mentioned in my introduction, I work a lot with youth, and I was recently at an event with the Secretary General's Envoy on Youth, and she was asked about what is the biggest challenge that is facing young people today, and she reflected that in many cases, young people seek educational opportunities that will prepare them for a changing world. And I think naturally a lot of people would think, oh, a changing world of work, having the skills and capacities to be able to engage in that. But I think it's maybe a lot more deeper than that. I think in the many societies that we all live in today, we see that growing numbers recognize that the flourishing societies that we are seeking are not just ecologically and materially sustainable, but also socially, ethically, and morally sustainable societies that we are yearning for. And in order to achieve the building of these societies at a scale and over successive generations, this requires a deepening consensus on the social ends that education is to serve. What are the types of people are the educational systems striving to produce, and what qualities and patterns of society is education working to foster? So from this perspective, a primary objective of educational systems becomes the raising of individuals who operate in ways that recognize our shared humanity and interdependence. The task of such systems is to inspire in successive generations of learners a willingness to think and act in ways and a desire to become responsible citizens of an interdependent world. They also equip individuals with the cooperative and collaborative skills needed to both bring about and operate effectively within this emerging reality. In many ways, this is reflected in the development efforts of the Baha'i community. Central to the Baha'i community's understanding of the process of social betterment is the generation, application, and diffusion of knowledge. So this is done through decentralized worldwide process of spiritual and moral education that seeks to raise the capacity within a population to take charge of its own social and intellectual development. So in order for entire populations to take charge of their own development, we need a paradigm shift, really, in the way that we think about development. Development is not something that we do for others. The well-being of any segment of humanity is connected with the well-being of the whole. And we need to constructively build on existing consensus. And in many ways, this has been reflected by the other speakers as well, and particularly Winifred's wonderful presentation that our current systems of governance, economics, health, and education, among others, are inadequate to meet the demands of an increasingly interconnected global society. I think this also applies to something that we have already acknowledged, that dizzying qualities of wealth are being amassed into fewer and fewer hands, and the instability and volatility this creates is amplified by disparities in income and opportunity, both between and within nations, whether they be in the global north or in the global south. So this brings us to, where are we standing today? We can see that in the current multilateral and political climate, we have seen many shifts. And though we see that there's more consciousness around humanity's interconnectedness and oneness, we also are confronted with larger questions around trust and integrity. So in the context of the SDG Summit and the ongoing outcome and agenda processes and the possible contributions that stakeholders can make, we need to be able to understand that such transformations and shifts need to be considered at every step of the way. And at the heart of the deliberations currently ongoing, a central question can animate and bring new life to these conversations. How do we go about creating a set of conditions that enable every individual and every social group to develop the latent potentialities and thereby contribute to the flourishing of the entire social body? I think this is at the heart of many of these conversations. So this SDG Summit can present an opportunity to tap back into the appreciation of humanity's interconnectedness and collective endeavor, which was at the heart of the 2030 agenda when it was agreed upon in 2015. And the spirit that animated the emergence of that agenda, which really represented a significant moment in humanity's collective history, is something that we can draw upon. So just to conclude, if member states with the support of civil society and other stakeholders can convey a visions of humanity's trajectory towards a prosperous future for all, where conditions are created for each population to achieve its fullest potential, perhaps such a shared vision of humanity's future can be a wellspring of motivation to propel action and a source of much needed hope today. Thank you so much for the opportunity to share these reflections, and I'm looking forward to the discussion. Over to you, Kieran.
Thank you so much. I could really feel the spirit behind your words. I think a lot of that resonated with me. I'm sure with many of us. I think this idea of building upon the existing consensus is so important, and kind of just explaining some of these linkages between ideas. So this is what I think UNANIMA International really accomplished by linking the idea of homelessness to a human rights violation, the working group to end homelessness as well. We advocated for a paradigm shift there. And the same thing needs to happen around a lot of violations to human rights, showing that these societally acceptable things such as poverty are really violations of what we're standing against, which is violations of human rights. So thank you so much for your really, really insightful comments. I'm happy that we'll be hearing from all the speakers more in the Q&A shortly. So one second here. I would like to invite the Ambassador of Ireland to make final comments before we move into a more general question and answer session. And remember, you can put your comments into the chat in the meantime, or raise your hand. And thank you so much, Ambassador. You can go ahead.
Thank you very much. Sorry, I was knocked out there. There's some technical issue. I think I pulled the plug mistakenly, so I missed some of the conversation. But look, I think, as you said, Karen, we're capturing here the energy of civil society, the realism, the challenge, but also that sense of not giving up. And I think that's the really important point, that, you know, it's easy to throw our hands in the air and say there's nothing can be done. It's all gone haywire. The world is in a state of crisis, and that's really, really important. We don't give in to those kind of impulses. That we absolutely hard-headedly look at the challenges, look at what's required, look at where we're all falling short, governments as well as everyone else, and then drive on with that sense of urgency and hope, and don't give up. That's not a policy that in any way inspires people. So, you know, really, really good, really important, impactful contributions today. Myself, my team have been tuning in, listening. We're adding it all to our store of knowledge. And even though our formal work as co-facilitator ends, you know, it's ended already technically, but it certainly will end on Monday. Certainly Ireland is not giving up in this space, and will be continuing to work here at the UN, through our development program, through our domestic policies, to secure implementation as far as we can of the SDGs. We're not giving up. We know you won't all give up, so let's keep on going. Thank you.
Thank you once again for being here, and for that inspiration, and for the collaboration, which is the most important part. So from here, I would like to open up the floor for if anyone has questions. I see that we have one in the chat. So please, if you would like to say something, try to keep your statements and questions to around 30 seconds, just in respect of the time left today. And I'll take about 3 at a time in order to then direct those to all of our wonderful speakers. If you have a question specific to one speaker, you can also specify that. So the first one that we have in the chat is from Beth Blissman, and that is, how do we all work together for safer, saner pathways to change?
I mean, I can come in if that was a general question for all the panelists. I don't know if there's a preference on who should answer it, or if we can just jump in.
You can go ahead, Lily, and then we'll follow up with whichever other panelists would like to answer.
Wonderful, thank you. Thank you, Beth, for the question. I think it's a valid one within the UN system because there are always so many ongoing processes, simultaneous in some cases. So it's not always very clear on how do we work together and how do we contribute to achieving the change that we're looking for. But I think regardless of that, I think at this particular moment in time, there are a number of networks and a number of organizations who are really looking to this particular moment within the UN's history to really kind of capitalize on, I think the SG has called it an inflection point. You know, our member states and civil society going to be able to cooperate effectively to reflect the seriousness and the severity of our current global situation. And I think just kind of looking inwardly as an organization at the strengths that one has and the contribution that one has been able to make, but also recognizing that there are a number of networks of other organizations that are working together, whether it was, I think, in the process towards kind of contributing to the political declaration for the SDG summit through the major groups, or, you know, with the whole our common agenda process, there are, you know, networks of organizations like the Coalition for the UN We Need, who are really trying to bring together civil society in a united way to contribute to the efforts that member states are making. So I think it's a combination of kind of knowing the strengths of one's organization and the work that is being done internally, but then also joining hands with other organizations to really add to what is being done by the member states. And I think within civil society, just recognizing that it's important that we also model the behavior that we want to see, and that we show forth that sense of unity and collaboration as well. That goes a long way. So that's what I would say to that. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Marissa or Destina, Winifred, does anyone else want to have an input?
Kerwin, I'd just like to add to what Lily has said. And it's a matter of, I think, we NGOs breaking our siloed approaches. And I think we've tended to work in silos according to organization, according to specialization. And somewhere, I think the mindset is to realize that the other organizations are trying to present another facet of the diamond, if we can look at the SDGs as a diamond with many sparkling moments in it and reflections. And so how can I, through my mindset and my attitude and my relationships with other NGOs, how can I, without ever saying a word or maybe even attending a meeting, be in a spirit of solidarity with the other of goodwill who is trying to bring forward their part in this evolution to a new moment in humanity's well-being. So that's what I say for myself. One person can't do anything, can't do everything. One organization can't do everything, but all of us together can do a huge amount. And so how do I hold that in my soul, in my being, and in my relationships? Thank you.
Thank you, Winifred. And I think it's really important to note that in this question, she talked about how can we be saner, and collaborating is probably the #1 way to feel saner, because we don't want to feel alone in addressing these extremely complex global issues. I see that Marissa has unmuted. Would you like to speak to this?
Yeah, I can just intervene really briefly. I was kind of reflecting and inspired by what my co-speakers just mentioned. I think, Winfred, you were saying, you know, each of us collaborating and working with each other. I think at least what I would like to maybe just add to that would be each of us also being willing to change how we're doing things and being open to I mean, if we need such a paradigm shift, we need to learn, and we need to do things differently than we did before, and maybe within our institutions, within our organizations, being open to that, to seeing that maybe, you know, as much as we are working towards the same goals, we could maybe, you know, shift how we've been approaching them within our institution, if that's needed.
Thank you very much. I will move to the next question, which I think is addressed specifically to Winifred, though I'd love to hear Despina's give an answer on this as well, which is, what are the next steps at the grassroots, local, and national levels?
Well, I'll be very interested in hearing Despina's take on it as well. From my perspective, I feel that we as an organization do a lot of talk about advocacy at the national level, but then we say, well, we don't know what to do and we don't know how to do it. And somewhere or another, I was very impressed during the high-level political forum when the Coalition 2030 from Ireland were here, and their engagement throughout the process, inputting into the report of the government, and then following the process right through to the UN, and speaking in terms of the country's report, having a response as to what more needed to be done. And so I think we have to designate people at the local level and at the national level to engage in specifically the framework for the SDGs. And we have to go seeking to be responding or asking governments to allow us to share our insights, etc., with them. So that's where I stand on that at the moment. Thank you.
Thank you, Winifred. Despina, would you like to speak to that briefly?
Thank you, Kieran, and thank you, Winifred, for your wisdom and valuable contribution as always. Well, I think that I will agree with everybody, but specifically what we need, the steps that we need to move forward at the grassroots level. I think we need to be more engaged and to build collaboration and partnerships with local national officials and national institutions in order to share our knowledge and experiences, and build their capacity and our capacity as well, in order to maximize complementarity and sustainability in our work. I think that's the key. We need to work more on that. It's something that I'm looking forward to seeing the results of any of such kind of an approach at the local level. Thank you, Karen.
Thank you so much. Thank you to all the panelists. Thank you for everyone for your insightful questions. It has been a joy hearing such a diverse range of inputs and questions today. And I'm sure if you have any further questions, you can direct them to specific panelists in the near future. So with that, with heartfelt thanks to Jean, UNANIMA, and all organizers of the event, I would like to invite Jean to close out. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed for an extraordinary session this morning or this afternoon or this evening, wherever you are. Can I just finish by, I always have a mantra, as you know very well, Kieran, don't talk about us without us. So I think it was really important to hear from our friends in Nepal and Zambia, and hearing the words that they're looking for: empowerment, leadership, participation, and an inclusive society. And that's the wisdom I would like to leave all of us with today. Thank you all very much indeed for joining us for this session.